We are on Tawheed, session 26. The date is the 17th of March. The time is 10:52. The Tawheed, session 26. We are on chapter 6, page 36. The chapter is He does not beget, nor was he begotten. Okay.
Yeah,
We have already outlined the definite proofs that underpin the concept that the necessarily existent can only be one being, not two or more than two, ever. Indeed, this being has names, attributes, and characteristics which express or convey meanings and concepts that relate to his being or his self. They exist according to this self being definitely connected to it, with no manner in which this could be separated. If that were ever possible, even in one specific manner, characteristic or attribute, which invariably would contradict the notion of the necessarily existent, which implies that it is a duty necessary in itself. Its attributes and their connectedness from every aspect, and in every consideration eternally and forever, regardless of time and space, or in all times, if it is permissible, originally to express it in terms of time. Moreover, in relation to this being, it is impossible that it can be considered of consisting as parts, that is, capable of separation or separating, in a way that each part could be existing by itself, as it is the case with the limbs of a human being who can cut off his hand, bury it, and continue living for a long time, even with this disability and the arising deficiency. This would be impossible in respect to the necessarily existent, as if there is any part of him that is capable of separating, that means that he has something from among the various meanings of contingency, thereby contradicting the very basic notion of necessity.
But just a quick, the introduction, the beginning, about one paragraph about what attributes and so on, is just to clarify that some people say a being is composed of an essence and attributes. This is just an abstraction. That's the way how the mind works in studying complex things, but is not separable in itself, and it cannot be conceived that the attributes can be separated from the being itself. At least for a necessary existing being. For contingent being, maybe, like for example, let me give a standard example. The wall here in my room is maybe light blue. Okay. We can say it's actually blue. This light blue is actually the color of the paint. The wall itself is not having no color or another color and so on. That's because it's composed of two things, of a paint and so on. But even in the paint, it is a mix of other things, and the light is the result of absorption also. So it's a mix, so it can be separated. But abstractly, if we have something like a mathematical point which has a color, nothing can be separated there. If that mathematical point is red, it is red in itself. But in our mind, we can separate the redness from being, and so that's only separation in the mind. It's impossible to separate in reality, in fact. So that's concerning attributes and things like that. But now we go really to being composed of things, real composition. First, necessary existing, it's impossible, as the discussion continues. So the first paragraph is addressing this issue that some people may think that attributes are extra to the being or something like that. This is nonsense. Extra to being or not extra being is just a matter of abstraction. Has nothing to do with the ontology itself. But we will go now really to being composed of different parts, which each one can be really separated, like the example of the hand of a human and things like that. Yeah, carry on. Just when you read again, because this will not be clear in one reading or two readings. As I said, these things have to be read. If necessary, make like a ball or like a set and put things there and try to make an image, mental image of these things, so you can conceive them.
This has opened up a few questions, so Abu Hamza, feel free to fire away.
So, I understand, because the nature of human mind, we're limited and dependent, etc. So we need to understand, unpack complex things, look at different components, and in that context, this is how the mistake was made. So is it basically, is it correct?
Whatever the source of mistake, it is just an abstraction. It is impossible in reality to separate the being from its attribute.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking,
a naked being without any attributes, that is just an abstraction and impossibility in itself.
That's correct. So just two questions. So one was when I was thinking back when I studied thingy, usul al-fiqh and stuff like that. Basically, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses human beings, He addresses human beings as in their nature. And for we
Yeah, no,
compartmentalize.
I
That's the
agree
point
with
you're
that,
making.
but we're not saying that where the source, why it is like that. We are saying it is like that in itself. Why it appears like that, that's something else. That's more
Yeah.
psychology, more epistemology. But the reality is that a naked being without any attributes is just an abstraction which is impossible to exist. It's just for studying it.
And on that note, my question is basically about, Asma al Sifa and,
That's what I'm addressing, yeah.
That's what you're addressing. That's fine.
That the sifat is not extra to the that, because there's no such thing as called that or essence or being in itself naked of any attribute. It does not.
Just a question in here historically, when did this occur? And
that's come from originally from the Greek and so on, and developed like that.
And we picked it up, and from the Muslim Islamic history. When was this, right from the beginning, or
later the 1st century, early 2nd century, yeah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Yeah.
Does this also
people get confused that you can't in abstraction you have a being in front of you, it has certain attributes, then you may abstract say there's a that an entity in itself without any attribute. It doesn't exist. It's an impossibility.
Might as well be an idol then, isn't it? It might as well be an idol, isn't it? It's a banana.
No, it's nothing. It's absolutely impossible.
But the point I'm making that it's an inanimate object. It has nothing within itself intrinsic.
No attributes, nothing. So this is nothing. It's just an abstraction so that we can study. If we say we're talking about this extreme study is knowledge, that's an attribute to study this and so on, and we separate that from his being. It's not separable. It's not like a hand to be cut away from a human being. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. I totally agree.
Does this also end the discussion of this, Allah's hand, etc., all these kind of things?
No. Don't worry about that. but this introduction is that to exclude anyone coming with that the sifat of the that or not the that or things like that. The being itself can be without attributes as well. It can't be. It's impossible. So this is not that a being is having multiple attributes, like Allah having knowledge, having power, having this, does not mean that he is composed. That's the meaning of it. Has nothing to do with composition. What composition is that to explain that the two different separate beings which have been put together or can be separated. Yeah. Good. Carry on. Now we'll go to the example. I might just clarifying that introducing paragraph is addressing this point. In the short, I'm not going very long in matter of that and sifat and that. I'm going on this nightmare, which the clarification of that is very simple. An attribute which is not carried by a that is an impossibility. Although you can study it, you can refer to it, you get ilm without an entity which is the alim, which has carried that ilm. Yeah, ilm, abstract. Yeah, you can abstract that. Can it exist? No. That's another type of linguistic illusion. That's you think it because you can refer it to and you can give it a name and you can study it. You think it's something that exists. No, not necessarily. And they gave always the example of the square circle. The square circle does not exist, although you can refer it linguistically. Square circle. It's a very legitimate linguistic description.
The word that
something is an impossibility.
When you say the word that, is that attribute? What's the technical term again?
That is the essence. The thing without any attributes, which is nothing, which is impossibility.
So Professor, you normally, I guess I would think about it before, like, there's certain, or that people would think about, like, there's certain essential attributes, and then there's things like, I don't know, proving like Allah's rahmah. You do it from his attributes. I don't know, you see from the eyes of creation. Is there any way to prove Allah's rahmah, like, by logical necessity? Then, like,
don't worry about proving necessity. Is rahmah something separate than the entity? Can be envisaged rahmah abstract without any entity carrying it? No. It's an impossibility. Still, you can talk about rahmah. That you can talk about rahmah does not mean that rahmah, independent from any essence, from any being, is something which can exist. No, it cannot exist. It's an impossibility. Or you can talk about it and it's a characteristic and so on. Yeah, you can. The same with like the square circle. It's a circle which is square at the same time. Very nice, but that's still something like that. You can talk about it, that does exist. I give you an example, which fools many people and cause problem for Russell and Whitehead in their Principia Mathematica. When they face the problem of the set of all sets, which does not contain itself as an element, or the opposite, set of all sets, which does contain itself as an element. Both do not exist. It's just although the formalization, if you look at it, it looks legitimate, it looks nice. You can talk about it. But it's an impossibility. It doesn't exist. Is a semantic, is a linguistic illusion. It's a linguistic illusion. It's an illusion. Yeah, that's my point there. That's all. We don't need to go into more details about these things, Rahma proof, and that's all. That comes later. That's later. We're talking more basic things here. Okay. Keep that in mind.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor. Sorry. With the incorrect understanding, Asma and Sifa, is it correct? Is this what they assumed, that Asma is the label and Sifa is the reality of what's being labeled, or the attributes of what's being labeled?
No. Sifat, like for example, no. Asma, like for example, Alim. Allah is having knowledge, is knowledgeable. What he has, which from who the name Alim is derived, is the attribute called ilm. Yeah, ilm.
Right.
Now they consider the following, because you can formulate that linguistically. They thought it is possible, like the Mu'tazila said, alim bidun ilm. Alim, some people say they deny a sifat. How can someone be alim without ilm? What they mean is that alim without ilm separates from his being. They detected this point, but they didn't formulate it properly. And the other side said, oh, they deny the attribute. They deny Allah has ilm. No, they say Allah is alim. He has that name, but it's the essence and cannot be separated from ilm whatsoever. But they did not express it clearly, because at the time, these issues of optical illusion, mental optical illusion, semantic illusion, even semantic illusion is not even developed until now to any significant extent. There are scattered things here and there, singular cases. There's no complete theory of it yet. Like optical illusion, we know the theory because of the perspective and things like that. You can create optical illusion. You know how to create. And we have the famous Escher drawings. Just check in the internet about the impossible drawings of Escher and things like that. It was not developed at that time. Now the Ash'ari said, no, he has the attribute of ilm. And it is extra over that. No, it's not extra or non-extra. It's essentially in the definition of that. But they thought because you can separate them in the study, it's somehow extra. It's not. Because the that without any attribute does not exist, is nonsensical. And the attribute without a that is nonsensical. That is not a separation, not a composition. That's what the whole beating around the bush is, that this is not a separation.
So
either you say it is extra or not extra. It doesn't make that the divine or the necessary being is composite. It's not. That's not a composition we mean. We say the divine being is simple, is not composed. Okay.
I see. So back onto that. When we say Allah's names, we mean it truly that He is the ultimate form, and you cannot separate a part of it. You can only see an aspect. So, for example, Rahman, we see an element of it in the womb, but that's not His only Rahman. Sorry, only Rahman.
No.
That's only
Rahman. Get something which has nothing to do with womb, just linguistic ilm. Ali meaning someone who has ilm. When the Mu'tazila say alim bidun ilm, meaning not a separate ilm from his being. That's what they mean. But they formulated it wrongly, inviting the others to cause trouble and attack them in the wrong direction. And the others committed the wrong in the other direction.
What was the attack? What was the attack against them?
That they say alim bidun ilm. How can someone be alim without having ilm?
It does make sense.
It does make sense. But what the Mu'tazila meant is not alim bidun ilm. His ilm is his own being. It's not separable from that. It cannot be divided. Cannot be separated from him. It's not like the paint on the wall. You can scrub it away. It's not like that. But they did not develop it this way, because they thought what would come in the mind of these things is automatically reflecting some kind of a reality outside the mind. It's not necessary. It could be a linguistic illusion. It could be a mental optical illusion, and also optical illusion is from this category, because the illusion emerged in the mind. It's not outside. Outside, there's no illusion. Outside, there's certain distribution of lights and lines and so on, and waves. But the brain interprets them in the wrong way, or
So the
cannot
brain would-
interpret them properly.
So we would ultimately interpret projections, what's emanating
Yeah,
from.
that's because of projection. And if you study engineering and so on, how to do projective geometry, you see where you can play with the geometry a little bit, and you can fool the eye and the mind. That's it, and you create optical illusion.
Yeah.
Check these Escher impossible pictures of Escher. You see a stairs which goes in itself infinitely, but it's impossible. It can't exist outside. So how can you see it? You see it like that going in itself, and you know it is impossible. How can this happen? This is optical illusion.
I see.
Okay?
That's
But
clear.
it was not developed at that time yet. Humanity was developing bit by bit. And the people made a big fuss about something they should not indulge in and say, okay, we're still starting this research. We're researching it. Instead, they made a big aqidah and warfare about that, carry the sword, attack the mubtadi'ah, and all these nonsense. That's the problem. Not that they studied that. You can study it, but you must know that you are starting a very long, complicated discourse. Some of it takes centuries, like the issues of limits. Huh? Like the so-called Zeno paradox. You know the Zeno paradox. Zeno said the following. If you shoot an arrow over 100 meters, it takes it in 1 second. This means after 50 meters, half second has been consumed. Okay, good. And then divide further another quarter of a second. But this means the whole distance will be transferred in half plus quarter plus eighth plus. This is an infinite number of numbers. If you add infinite, it will become infinity. That's the mistake here. See, that contradicts the fact that we still cross 100 meters in 1 second. There's some contradiction. There's no contradiction. The only problem Zeno had and the people at the time, they could not sum half plus eighth plus 1/16, etc. They cannot sum it. We can't sum it now. We know it ends being 1, exactly. We know that. Geometric series. At that time, that was even not detected yet. People were unable to deal with limits yet. And infinities, probably. They don't have the proper definition yet. Do you know that the zero was a problem for the people until essentially Arab mathematicians started using zero? Well, what's zero? How can nothing be a number? It took centuries, millennia, until zero became a respectable number. It can be added to the number system and treated in a reasonable way, completing the number system. Yeah, you see? So it's a progress. It's a progress. The people at the time thought, no, that's what we have is the absolute truth. That's it, all of this there. It's not. They just overestimated the capabilities. They were not humble. If they were humble, they would not have needed to wage wars against each other about mistakes. Oh, it seems to be there's some deep issue there we did not master yet. Let's work on it. Maybe we don't achieve it in my lifetime. Maybe the next generation may achieve it. Maybe a generation after that. Some of these things took thousands of years to develop, like the zero, like the Zeno paradox, the paradox of the arrow, which is not a paradox. The only paradoxical, he does not know how to sum these half plus quarter plus etc. etc. He is unable to sum it. But we are able. We know how to sum. We know very well how to sum. Make the infinite sum. And the way it's done, if any one of you ever studied, I think it's even in high school mathematics now, you do a geometric series up to the level n, and then you add it, and then you see that if n goes to infinity and they have the factor, there's less than 1, it will go to 0. Khalas, you have the sum in front of you. It's a perfect sum. It's not infinite. It's a finite number. There are other series which sum to infinity. Yes, there are, and others who converge faster and so on. A whole theory, a whole mathematics have been developed with integration and differentiation. But this is all recently, 400 years, 300 years. Before that, people were completely unable to do anything in that direction yet in a systematic way. Okay, let's go back to the severed hand and things like that.
Okay. as is the case with the limbs of a human being who can cut off his hand, bury it, and continue living for a long time, even with a disability and arising deficiency. This would be impossible in respect to the necessarily existent, as if there is any part of him that is capable of separating. That means that he has something from among the various meanings of contingency, thereby contradicting the very basic notion of necessity. This is quite evidently conveyed by the notion that the necessarily existent cannot be other than a singular entity that is not composed of parts as set out in a previous chapter.
Yeah, we discussed that previously. Based on that, there's only maximum of one necessary existing being, and if there's only one, how can you compose anything out of one? This is only that one. If we have multiple, like many humans, we can compose, maybe make a committee out of them, compose something. But if there's only one, you have only that one. So that's it. Okay, Nick, carry on.
This is quite evidently conveyed by the notion that the necessarily existent cannot be other than a singular entity or being that is comprised of parts as set out in the previous chapter. Perhaps in further recalling that an additional explanation to clarify this matter is required at this junction to underline the importance of this. The presence of a part relating to the necessarily existent would mean accepting the idea of separation and conveying the meanings of possibility. It can be present in that particular part and it may remain after its separation, thereby meaning one of two things. Firstly, this part is not necessary for its existence, and that the being itself can accept either such an increase or decrease. It means that it could be cut in whole or in part, which means the entity could accept such a variance of increase or decrease or increase. Ultimately, that would be in stark contradiction to the meaning of necessarily existent. It would mean that there is a necessity and contingency at one and the same time, from the same point of origin, which would be impossible. Second, it is complete, self-standing, absolutely sufficient in itself without that part, so that part is not of it, i.e. not some of it, and it's a piece of it at the same time and of the same consideration. This is also a combination of the two extremes, resulting in impossibility.
Yeah.
So what you mean there is an annex, but it's still trying to, the assumption is there's some kind of dependency there, but it can't be. Is that what you're the second part?
Yeah. Okay. Second, that is clear. If the one part is not if one of the parts is necessarily existing and completed itself, does not do the thing, then what is the purpose of that part which you have separated, which is separable, really separable? I mean, it was not there in the first place. It's separate all the time. It doesn't make any sense to talk about composition if the part A is complete in itself. So what the meaning of that B was separated from A? It was not in A in the first place. It wasn't there in the first place. So some independent entity which we claim to be part of A, but it was not part of A. It's separate from A anyway, from the beginning. But claiming that it's part of A, and we prove that it's not part of A, is a contradiction. That's not possible. And what's the third option? That both are contingent. That's even worse. That the composition is even worse. Cannot be necessarily existing. Yeah? That's the third one. What the third one says?
The third one, there's no mention of a third one. It's just first and second. So probably because it's been covered previously, I guess. The following is also not possible to say. Perhaps it is a composite. Yeah, okay, yeah. So it wasn't listed as a number. So the following is also not possible to say. Perhaps it is a composite of two independent selves or entities, each of which was its own, a complete necessarily existent, then decided to merge, choosing to be one being. This is also impossible for the following reasons. Basically, that's dualism anyway. Firstly, because we have cogently demonstrated that the necessarily existent applies only to one being, not to two or greater than the two. Though there are no two necessarily existent beings to begin with originally.
So how can they merge in the first place? There's nothing to begin with. It's impossibility. Yeah.
2. Knowing that this is an impossibility and assuming for the sake of argument that there could be several necessary beings, there will be no meaning for merging into one, because each of them would have reached the farthest extent of perfection, not able to be improved by any additions or components. Then there would be no reason for being a component. A complete compound necessitates that each component considers the other, recognizes him or it for its own sake, giving the other the rights relating to companionship, even in one sense or in action. Thus, this would be a kind of limitation and restriction, therefore implying deficiency and incompleteness. That means that each one of the two components is incomplete. This is a losing transaction, and therefore such a situation is utterly impossible, as it is built upon impossible premises and absurdities. So basically, it's saying that
No,
this
two
requirement,
necessary existing cannot exist, but even if we assume, just for the sake of argument, they do exist, then why they should merge? It will add nothing to them. It will just actually make them lose something. So the merging does not make any sense.
and then it says about
It lower
companionship.
the rank instead of increasing it. So why merge them? What the purpose of merging does not make any sense.
This companionship, this reference there is a kind of like dependency.
Yeah, and the composite will be then become suddenly contingent. So they are losing. It's a losing transaction. You are losing.
Okay. Furthermore, among the more extreme areas of impossibility would relate to a being or entity that is composite or hybrid, one of necessity, the other from amongst the possibilities. The necessary does not need the possible or merely probable because it is self-contained, complete by itself, not requiring composite parts or the like. The necessarily existent therefore must necessarily be one, absolute in every sense of oneness and absoluteness. Herein, this means that it's a singular entity which isn't composed of parts, and it does not accept division or fragmentation in any sense of the word whatsoever for all eternity. It was never originally composed of multiple necessary entities that existed before, nor does it break down or fragment into separate independent entities, regardless of the nature of these entities that might arise from such fragmentation, whether they be necessary or contingent. All of this is impossible and cannot be applied to the eternal and everlasting, necessarily existent being in any way.
And if you need an optical model, you can visualize in your mind the mathematical point, which is abstraction itself, but a mathematical point cannot be divided. It's just a point. It's singular. That's it. That's just to visualize something you can hold to with your internal insight or eye of the mind. But it's just a model, so you can visualize things on it a bit better than just merely abstract words. Okay, I think I mentioned that a model of a mathematical point brings to our minds a little bit of approximation of that's what we are talking about. Okay.
No conceptualization of offspring. Next section. From the previous line of reasoning, it is manifestly evident that it is impossible for the necessarily existent to be a father. To argue that one entity, for example, B, is born from another, A, readily implies that a part of A has separated from it, forming B.
Yeah.
That could happen firstly by way of division, in a direct manner, as is the case with some simple living organisms that reproduce by way of splitting. The process involves the parent cell dividing into two daughter cells, and these cells begin to grow to full size. With this example, the parent effectively disappears thereafter, ceasing to exist. Further elaboration should be required here, because the process itself would be an impossibility for the necessarily existent. There is no division, subdivision, nor any form of perishing. Thereafter, even with the assumption based upon an impossibility, the born or offspring entity would have come into existence after non-existence, meaning therefore it was preceded by non-existence, whether that is in terms of time or in the sequential order of existence. Such as being would not be considered necessarily, thus not being of the same essential nature of the Father. Instead, it would belong to the category of beings, either contingent or from among the possibilities. An entity that is born must be of the same essential nature of the father, unless being an illegitimate child, therefore not truly the offspring of the one it is attributed to, and
It's
the
not
attribution is false.
Not possible, yeah. So
So essentially,
it's a created being, is a product, and not part of the father.
If we find that's based because is the essence of the father is being uncreatable.
Yeah, if it's existing, that's
yeah. If we find among countless beings one that arose in such a manner, it is indeed a created contingent being without any doubt. Anyone who describes it with terms like budding, birth, or emanation, or any similar terms, has made a grave mistake. A grave mistake grossly misrepresented reason and its concepts, misused language and its terminology, and has gone far astray. Emanation, is that the same sort of the projection, or is that something where it's
emanation is something comes like the light emanates from the sun?
Is it almost like an eruption as an essence of it is passed out? Because
but the light emanates from the sun because the sun is a composite object, so something can emanate, can go out from there.
So something actually physical occurring as opposed to just a projection.
Leave the word physical, something appearing from that necessary existing, nothing can come out of that in that way.
I see. Something diminishing itself.
Yeah, by diminishing itself or being part of it. So that what emanates can be called divine or can be called necessary or something. No, that is not possible. It can be called created. That's something else. So we are not arguing about that. That's the whole created reality is like that. Okay. But not divine. The created things are not having any divinity. They are not offsprings of the divine being.
Secondly, the notion of budding. Many types of algae, fungi, and even higher up plants plants higher up the scale of ordering have this. The process occurs when a part of the parent separates off, with the parent remaining mostly intact or with only a slight reduction, and the separated part grows into an organism of the same type as the parent over a period of time. Once again, this is an impossibility for the necessarily existent being, which cannot undergo division or fragmentation, as we have previously stated. Regarding the offspring, it is in the same category as the offspring in the previous example. It is nothing more than a created being that has been gravely misrepresented. Thirdly, there is a matter of mating. This is the case with animals and some plants of higher order. Two parents contribute to producing the offspring, where a sperm from the father combines with an egg or seed from the mother. This idea is even more possible than the previous mention, since there is only one this idea is even more impossible than the previous mention, since there is only one necessarily existent being in all of existence. So where would the other party in this strange union come from? Perhaps one of the two is a contingent being, while the other is a necessary being. This would lead to all the impossibilities as we have previously mentioned regarding the necessarily existent being, and additional impossibilities related to the merging or union of the necessary with the contingent, or even the idea of the necessarily existent being inhabiting the contingent. These issues require some further explanation and independent consideration, which we will address soon by the will and mercy of Allah. Lastly, all other additional matters would be brought together here. Whether they are real, with a corresponding model existing in the temporal world, or those that are imagined, being conceived only in the mind, whatever is the case, it must involve the separation of a part from the necessarily existent being. Otherwise, the term birth would be a misnomer. Again, any form of fragmentation or subdivision is impossible and cannot be applied to the necessarily existent. Alternatively, it would imply the participation of another entity in the realm of having necessity of existence, and that again is an impossibility. Thus, there is only one singular necessarily existent being, nothing more, with no addition or subtraction. Next part, the Nicene Creed. What we have outlined earlier in relation to the concept of being generated from Allah equally applies to other statements made of the same vein. Whether these statements purport to show that a certain entity emanated from Allah, or radiated, or flowed, and other similar type expressions, All such terms necessarily involve the concept of something emerging from something else, or something being generated from something else, just as water emerges from a rock or a liquid flows from a vessel. All of this is impossible for the necessarily existent being, except where it is a misuse of terminology to describe the creation of an independent entity separate from its creator. Anything else is false and impossible. All of this is impossible regardless of the concept of time and space. Generation from Allah is impossible whenever it occurs, now, in the past, or before all times and ages. Indeed, asserting such a notion before the ages, as it is found in the Nicaean Creed, which is the belief held by the... Sorry about a second. Sorry, go back. Generation from Allah is impossible, whether it occurs now, in the past, or before all times and ages. Indeed, asserting such a notion before the ages, as it is found in the Nicaean Creed, which is a belief held by the majority of Trinitarian Christians, only complicates the issue further and adds additional impossibilities to the contradictions and impossibilities we have previously covered. Adherents to the Nicaean Creed might level an objection by saying, you have not been fair to us, because our use of terms like generation and emanation are but metaphors and allegories. We intend something akin to deriving a logical, intellectual, or mathematical conclusion from another premise, which is then called the results, while the original premise is called a premise. For example, if we have a right-angled triangle in an Euclidean plane, it can be proven that the square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides, the Pythagorean theorem. Accordingly, it would be permissible to say that the Pythagorean nature of the triangle emanated or was generated from the right-angled nature of the triangle, albeit figuratively. So essentially saying it's not an emanation in that sense, it's just an essential attribute of mathematics.
But we'll answer to that, yeah.
Okay. By way of a fitting response to that, we would argue we are conversant that many orators, writers, and poets often resort to various rhetorical techniques and figures of speech to stimulate the imagination, evoke emotions, and motivate will. This is necessary because human beings are not merely rational beings, but complex entities having both intellect and emotion, the latter often referred to as the heart. They act with will and choice. However, emotions and will are like swift horses that, if not guided by the bridle of reason, will inevitably lead the rider over the precipice into the abyss of sophistry and misguidance, which is manifest error and injustice. Allah is the Exalted says, only those who are lost in error follow the poets. Do you not see how they rove aimlessly in every valley? How they say what they do not do. No, not so those poets who believe, do good deeds, remember Allah often, and defend themselves after they have been wronged. The evildoers will find out what they will return to. That's Quran 26, 24, 224, 227. 227. Secondly, whilst it is readily acknowledged that the human mind and intellect is limited, Allah has endowed it with a remarkable ability to grasp the abstraction of impossibilities and to express them in language with grammatically correct sentences and phrases. That can even extend to literary beauty and its appreciation. Such sentences and propositions may seem like they can be judged as true or false. For example, they may in reality be devoid of meaningful content, such as the statement, the human soul is green in color, because the soul is not a material substance to which concepts of color apply. In this case, the correct response is that this statement is meaningless. The soul cannot be described in terms of color or at all. If you were to say the human soul is not green, one might mistakenly think it is red, for example. They might also appear to be sentences and propositions that can be judged as being true or false, but in actuality they represent a mental estimation of certain possibilities. For example, if someone says to their beloved, I was overcome by longing and desire for you, and I rolled from the bottom to the top. So is this as it's an
a bit of poetry in Arabic.
Okay. So it's basically unrelated phrases.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's continue to see the response to that.
When
that very great, that sounds very, very emotional. He's in the bottom of a hill and she's up there. and out of love he rolled upwards and things like that.
Sounds like a Bollywood film. When we recall and consider these fundamentals, we will find that the earlier Pythagorean example which was mentioned is a false analogy for several detailed reasons. Among these include the following. Birth is an inherent action of the parent, whereas father or mother from which the offspring, whether father or mother from which the offspring, whether son or daughter, results, and through this action the parent becomes a parent. If it were not for this action, the parent would not deserve to be called by this name. In contrast, deduction is an action of the intellect, not that of the premise, which here is the right angle nature of the triangle, or the conclusion, which here is the Pythagorean nature of the triangle. These two are, in our example at least, concepts about the triangle, or properties or considerations of the triangle that exist independently and are static without activity or dynamism. The intellect, which is the third entity, distinct from these, is the active and dynamic one. If there were to be a birth at all, it would be more appropriate to attribute it to the intellect. Because intellect being a process, as opposed to just a...
In the process of giving birth or being a father is a process done by the parents, by the father, while the equivalence of being right-handed or being perpendicular or something like that with the Pythagorean theorem is an equivalence, and the mind deduces that. The mind is the active one who deducing. These things are connected in the geometry by itself, by the axioms. They are not, neither the premises produces the result, nor the result. The mind deduces from the premises the result, and vice versa. In that case, obviously, the Pythagorean is equivalent. If you have a triangle which has fulfilled the Pythagorean theorem, it must be with a 90-degree angle in one corner of it by necessity, and so on. By the two equivalent statements, you look at from one side to the other side. But the mind formulates one as a theorem, derive from the premises this result, and the other way you list the premises, you derive from there the other result. That's it. So the active one, the one who's giving birth, if you wish to, is the mind, not the premises, not the result.
Next, birth is a one-way direction. The parent is the agent who gives birth, and the offspring is the object being born. It is impossible for the nature of this direction to reverse, making the offspring the agent and the parent the object. However, deduction allows for reversal. In our example, it is quite possible to consider the conclusion, the Pythagorean nature of the triangle, as the premise, and then reduce the result, the right angle nature of the triangle, albeit with some difficulty and effort.
Yeah, it's difficult to prove, but it is. So the equivalent statement. It's just two aspects of the same reality, the same truth.
The truth is that the Pythagorean nature of the triangle and the right angle nature of the triangle are attributes or considerations of a specific type of triangle. They either exist both simultaneously or do not exist simultaneously.
Yeah, equivalent, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Neither one gives birth to the other, nor does the second give birth to the first. So basically, it's a static phenomenon. It's a
relation. It's a relation. The moment you define triangles and right angle and Pythagorean characteristic is automatic. Right angle meaning Pythagorean meaning right angle. It just looks from another side. It looks completely different, but reality is expressing the same reality, the same nature of the geometry. We're dealing with Euclidean flat geometry. In non-Euclidean, non-flat geometry, it does not apply anyway. So that's it for this type of geometry with these type of axioms. These two, although they seem to be far away, formulated completely differently, but amazingly, they express the same fact about right angle triangles. Mm-hmm. Okay.
The theoretical intellect is the one that needs to connect these two in the process of deduction. However, the absolute intellect comprehends both simultaneously knowing them and their equivalents immediately, with certain absolute certainty. An important digression. With regards to the attributes of the necessarily existent being, such as knowledge, power, will, and life, which are distinct concepts, and the concept of knowledge is certainly not the same as the concept of power, and the concept of will is necessarily not the concept of knowledge, and so on and so forth. These attributes are not parts or components in the same sense explained
We
above.
discussed that earlier. Remember that. Now we're going back to the same point again, stressing it. Because
They-
some Trinitarians say Isa, the Holy Spirit is the love of God. Isa is the target of love and things like that. Trying to make it like an attribute, but attributes are not entities. They cannot be separated. So it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't solve the problem of the Trinity, the fallacy of the Trinity. And neither Isa or Messiah, the Messiah, nor the Holy Spirit is a divine being or having divine attributes with the Father. Assuming the Father is the original one, the top one, then these are created being or they don't exist at all. That's it. So but carry on, calling about the attributes. So this is that's part of the mistake where the people fell in when developing the Trinity. At that time, these concepts were not well developed, and people got strangled themselves in that problem.
These attributes are not parts or components in the sense explained above. They are not independent entities that can be separated, such as a limb that can be cut off from a human being.
Exactly.
Rather, they are qualities inherent to the appropriate essence. Decomposing or dividing them into independent entities or concepts, or discussing the essence as abstracted from all its attributes as if it were something, is merely a mental construct, often to facilitate study, enable research on the subject, and allow for organization and categorization. All of this is a mental estimation of linguistic reference, similar to how the mind estimates and imagines the matter of impossibilities. Similarly, the assertion that attributes are distinct from the essence, that is, the attributes as conceived as independent things in the minds, are separate from the essence itself, abstracted from its attributes in mental estimation. Such statements and expressions and similar ones pertain only to mental estimation or dialectical assumptions, meant to facilitate study and research. In actual essence, that is outside the realms of the mind. The attribute existing externally is inherent to the true essence that possesses that attribute. In other words, it is inseparably linked to it. Thus, it is universally agreed upon by all rational thinkers, philosophers, and studious researchers that an attribute cannot be said to be separate from the essence. The majority of philosophers, theologians, and scholars agree that attributes should not be considered the essence itself. However, some of the more astute among them have claimed that attributes are the essence itself, only in the sense of the necessary being, but this is not the case for any contingent beings. Here we would argue that these are matters which are essentially secondary. Secondary philosophical discussions, not really discussions related to the Sharia. Hence, they aren't of principal concern to us. Neither do they result in kufr or iman.
Iman doesn't make any difference what result you arrive there. And the most important is not a separate entity. It cannot be separated. It cannot be personalized as Isa or as Holy Spirit or anything like that. That's what counts. What they are in them, it may be worthy of research, maybe not worthy of research, maybe possible to research, maybe impossible to research. That's all not relevant. So the dispute between Mu'tazila and philosophers on one side and the Ash'ari is an empty dispute. Does not bring us anywhere forward or backward. It's usually just to slander the other side.
But I suppose in this frame argument, Ash'aris distinct from Atharis would be the wrong there, because they are arguing for
the Atharis that do not have anything to say that they are just almost mujassima. They're just really think about Allah as if he's a blob or some kind like a ball or matter or something. They think of it as if he's a material object, more or less. So they could not get out of that, an object of space and time, which is definitely he is not.
I think the only way that they could sustain their point of view,
abstraction like Ash'ari and the one of abstraction like Mu'tazila and philosophers, they dispute about this issue of attributes and so on. That dispute is not relevant, really.
Sheikh, the only way that I can imagine Atharis could avoid it is just literally stopping thinking about it. Because the minute you think about it,
just say it may be worthy of research, but has nothing to do with Aqidah. Is a secondary issue.
But what I mean is, for example, the way that they present themselves as being so, holier than thou, whatever, it's
because of self-righteousness and claiming that I have the truth, you are wrong, and slandering each other because of Baghi or Adwan, not because of any objective research.
but what I mean is that you don't have somebody corners the market on something as being, so for example, from looking at this, one would conclude that the Athari point of view is just manifestly erroneous. Manifestly
Which
to the
Ash'ari?
Athari, the Wahhabi.
No, leave those out. They don't have any importance in this area anyway.
But they've taken the moral high ground. They've assumed
that's something else in another area, not in this one. Not in this one. They have no research in this one.
Okay.
Ibn Taymiyyah addresses some of these things that they don't even read that section. When they come to a paragraph, they jump over it because it's too difficult for them to understand. Anyway, I remember when once visiting a real estate man and so on. He's quite rich and so on, very nice guy. And at that time, that was after I came from Germany, after having PhD and so on, my father mentioned casually that Muhammad got one copy. We got two copies from the Majmu' al-Fatawa Ibn Taymiyyah, collection of Fatwa Ibn Taymiyyah, printed by King Saud in 62, I think, or 63. In the summer, we got two copies. I took a copy. My father gave me a copy. He kept a copy for himself. That copy I read in the summer before going to Germany. And I kept reading and making notes and so on. And then my father mentioned casually that we got two copies. One copy took by Muhammad, and he read it fully in the summer. I said, really? I got a copy also at that time. I opened it. I didn't understand anything. I put it in the shelf. It's still in the shelf there. So that's all what they can. Ibn Taymiyyah addresses some of these issues with plenty of playing games and sophistry, also trying to get things to justify the Hanbali madhab in certain areas. That's it. So they don't have really a genuine structured research in that area of any levels. Mu'tazila and philosophers and Ash'ari, they have. Yeah, they have.
It's almost like a lobotomy is a prerequisite for them.
Where they feel self-righteous in issues of shirk and tawheed and all these things, where they made a blunder and rububiyyah.
But even this, they use these kind of discussions to beat the Mu'tazila. Like, for example, Mu'tazila is, I don't know much about it.
I know.
It's a dirty word. It's a dirty word for them. It's almost like you can't
everything against everyone. They use everything against everyone. Yeah. And then they use what statement of Ahmad Hanbal against Ash'ari and so on, and slander this and slander that. That's their business. But this is not relevant to the this point. That point is discussed there just to answer to the issue of Trinity and multiplicity of a divine being. It's not possible. Divine being cannot be a multiple object, which can be separated in various entities or persons or something like that. Even worse, not only an entity, separate entity, an entity which has its own separate will. So a personalized entity. Even worse, more catastrophic. Yeah, carry on.
They neither increase taqwa nor certainty. They do not bring one closer to the Lord of the worlds by even a fraction. This is contrary to the claims of the extreme zealots among the renegade sect of Wahhabism, the sect which falsely and slanderously claims that only they follow the Salaf. Yes, yet the true Salaf, the righteous predecessors, are innocent of them. All the claims of some obsessed extremists among the dialecticians and theologians. With regards to the point that Allah, may He be exalted, was not born, it is self-evident from the definition, because the word Jalala, majesty, can only be applied to the deity whose existence is eternal and necessary. The following has been mentioned in the acclaimed tafsir of Sheikh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti, Adwa al-Bayan. This is
Quran, yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is his book. So He the Almighty is praised, where he says, and say, praise belongs to Allah, who has no child nor partner in his rule. That's Surah 17, 111. With regards to the fact that he was not born, no one has ever claimed that about him, because it is rationally impossible, as proven by the well-known argument, which is as follows: if his existence may he be exalted, depended on him being born, then his existence would require someone to bring him into existence. Then the one who brought him into existence would also need a parent, and so on, leading to an infinite regress, which is utterly false. Moreover, the need for an offspring negates the concept of absolute self-sufficiency as samad, as has been mentioned earlier. If he had a parent, the parent would be prior and more deserving of being the necessarily existent being. Exalted is he above such matters. It might be said from the perspective of rational objection that if we were to assume, as where he states, say Prophet, if the Lord of mercy truly had offspring, 43:81, here we would argue, based upon the assumption, if he had a child, we would say, based on this assumption, what would be the origin and fate of this child? If the child came into existence, when does this occur? If the child is eternal, then there would be multiple eternal beings, which in turn is impossible. Then if the child is everlasting, then there would be multiple everlasting beings. And if the child were to come to an end, when would that occur? And if the child were destined to end, what was the purpose of bringing it into existence without any need for it? Thus, the notion of having a child is utterly refuted both rationally and textually, just as the notion of being born is also refuted, again, both rationally and textually. Okay, so this concludes this chapter, page 45. We haven't been able to cover much, but I think it's because it's getting late, we'll probably
Yeah,
next.
has to be no problem.
Yeah.
No problem. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, so any feel free any commentary on this, inshallah, and
no, I just mentioned the Shingiti because he's Maliki and from Shingit, from Mauritania, and so on, and he has some good education. And when he arrived in Saudi Arabia in the 60s, he was teaching in Riyadh. And then they decided to employ him permanently, and then he was checking the curriculum. That's a joke, but real, it happened. He was checking the curriculum, said, okay, I see the curriculum looks not bad, but where is logic, mantiq? He said, shh, don't even mention the word mantiq. It's almost kufr here in this area. I said, really? The guys are so stuck in their Hanbalism and Wahhabism. No problem. We introduce a subject called adab al-munadhara wal-barahin, etiquettes of dialogue and debate. And that is 2 volumes. First volume is pure logic. And this is being sold. I remember getting a copy from one of the centers of the service of university students, because they sent us and they copy things and sell it at cheap prices. I said, okay, no problem. We will treat them according to their mental capacity. We just introduce a new subject. So there's a need for that. Adab al-Munadhara. And they said, yeah, really. And he wrote that book. That's Muhammad al-Amin al-Shingiti, the one writer of Adwa al-Bayan. Say, okay, we take them for all right. Since they are so stupid, we can do something about that. And since then, the people in Imam Muhammad Saud University at Riyadh, they are studying logic under the title Adab al-Munadhara. So
they've been inception to become to Mu'tazila.
Yeah, it's just a standard in Mauritania. You study logic and mantiq, that's necessary. The same way you study Arabic language and basic things and basic mathematics, so you know what's going on in the universe, and in mind, at least, minimum. And these donkeys there, they don't know that. Mantiq is for the kuffar. So backward. And that's in the 70s of the last century. That's not 700 years back. That's just 70 years, not even 70, 50 years back. Deep stuck in their imaginary world of Salaf, imaginary Salaf who never existed. Okay? Good.
Me
Just a
too.
joke about Muhammad al-Amin al-Shankit. I remember seeing him. I know him. I have seen him going from building of a college to another building with his white beard and so on. Rahmatullah alayh. May Allah have mercy on him. He died in the 70s, I think. He was old at that time. Muhammad al-Amin al-Shankiti.
Okay,